everyone. Welcome to The Wheel of Mind, a character point of view reread podcast dedicated to Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. This season, we're taking a deep dive into Moiraine's point of view. I'm Lajar Dane of the White Aja.
Hey, and I'm Giskel Samaras, a scholar from Ilion. Just a warning out there, this is a reread podcast, so we will spoil anything and probably everything from any of the 15 books. This is for the point of view of someone who has already read it and going back to do an in-depth dive. So today we're here to discuss chapters 10, 11, and 12 of New Spring. Lajar, would you like to start us off with your synopsis of chapter 10?
Sure, thank you. Chapter 10 is called It Finishes. In the last chapter, we left off with Moiraine having completed only a handful of the 100 weaves during her test for the shawl. Recall that the shawl test ter'angreal leaves memory of who she is and what she needs to do, but it wipes away why she's there and the memory of each previous weave and scenario as soon as she walks into the next one. The chapter starts after she's completed the 99th weave and gives a montage of what she has endured so far, including accumulating physical injuries and fatigue. She knows she only has one left, and she hopes she can find an Aes Sedai or a reader, which is what they call their wise women in Cairhien, for healing or treatment afterward. Her father walks into the garden where she begins weaving the 100th weave. In the ter'angreal, she does not remember that he has passed away years ago, and so does not understand why she gets so teary-eyed upon seeing him. He tells Moiraine that her mother is dying, and she has just enough time to come see her before the end. She does not seem to remember that her mother is long dead as well. She holds off tears and hastily completes the weave. As she walks slowly back to the star symbol, she tells her father that she loves him and to pass the same message on to her mother. She stumbles back out of the ter'angreal and suddenly remembers the entire test, thinking on all the times she believes she failed to keep perfect serenity. Mirian announces it is done, no one may speak of what happened in the test, and she must spend the night in prayer and contemplation before donning the shawl in the morning. The sisters, all except Elida, rush to attend her to answer her dazed question, yes, you passed, and to offer healing. Moiraine is embarrassed that they saw the whole test, and also worried that Varen, who is now holding her clothes, might have looked through her secret book of maybe baby dragons. Moiraine realizes the test is not just a product of the ter'angreal, but must be somehow generated by the sisters, at least somewhat. She sees that some sisters seem to disapprove of the cruel final test using her deceased parents, and Moiraine blames Elida. When she gets back to the accepted quarters, she finds Siwan has already gone. When she gets back to the accepted quarters, she finds Siwan has already gone for her test, and distance has already grown between her and her fellow accepted friends, knowing that she'll be raised to the shawl in the morning. She goes back to her room, eats a feast, and checks her book for signs of tampering, but can't find any. But then again, maybe somebody could still carefully look through it without leaving any signs. They didn't dog-ear any pages or anything, at least. She stayed awake to wait for Siwan, who would barely have time to come get her stuff if she failed, so she wanted to make sure she didn't miss her one way or the other. Moiraine curls up with the very romance book she scolded Ellen Whirl for reading in chapter 2. Siwan does come back, and she has passed as well. They'll be raised together in the same shawl ceremony in the morning. Siwan wants to try one last prank. She's got not only a hot meal waiting for her, but 6 mice from a groomsman. After all, Elida needs repayment for those beatings, and this is their last night before officially being full sisters, who would presumably be too mature for this kind of foolishness. After some initial resistance, Moiraine agrees, and thus finishes chapter 10. It finishes.
Wow, I love this chapter. Again, there's no letdown with this one, like there is with a lot of things when you're building a climax in a story. There's so many stories you get to that point, you're like, well, I was hoping for something more. In this one, you feel the exhaustion. The point of view is so intense that even though we get the first 3 and the last, 4 out of the 100, you still you're there. You feel her exhaustion. You feel the elation at everything being completed, the embarrassment, all these roiling emotions. And I like that because so many times characters and stories seem so one dimensional. And in this, we got the satisfaction of a job well done tied in with wondering, did I do well enough, at the embarrassment if they saw it all, of all these things at once. And it's very indicative of human nature. That's how we are. A lot of ideas and thoughts and emotions battling sometimes all at the same time. And man, he put us there. We were Moraine going through that. And I love this chapter. I love this part of the story.
Yeah, I really do too. It's clear because of just how difficult this test is. I think we talked about some of this last time, why Aes Sedai are so serene. But I also like that Moiraine used loopholes wherever she could. So she did stuff that nobody said you can't do in the test, like when she danced around the Trollocs
Yeah.
before, when she wove fireballs at them in the last chapter as well,
Mhm.
when she was setting the spiders on fire. Nobody ever told them ahead of time, hey, you might have to split your weaves and use the power at some distractions while you're also doing the one of the 100 weaves.
Right,
Um,
right.
so she does it anyway, just does what she has to do in the moment, doesn't really remember any of the prep for the test or anything like that. And so she adds those details that were charming in the last chapter and that were especially touching in this one when she tells her father that she loves him. Nobody said she couldn't do that. It doesn't
Right,
count as breaking serenity. She didn't cry. She didn't lose any visual composure, didn't lose
right,
face. And I think it helps her compartmentalize it. She knows, does not know why, but she knows she has to go towards this star. She has to do the weave. And
right.
she needs to be able, there's very little she could do in that moment. She needs to just feel like she has done her part and then can kind of shut out the distraction and move on.
Right. Well, which is part and parcel of life as an Aes Sedai. The tower has to come before comfort, has to come before family, which, of course, even people with close family will lose them along the way because of their extended lifespans. Uh, so every the needs of the tower have to come before the needs of the individual and the desires of the individual. Now, they're given a lot of leeway in certain things, but when it's very clear that the tower has a need, it's going to come first. And just due to all the training, even with a limited memory, not knowing what's going on in that situation, still, hey, we're going to complete the mission. We're going to go forward. We're going to do what we have to do, in spite of, like you said, just almost a breakdown of seeing her father there. Like you said, not remembering that he's dead because everything you see while in the ter'angreal is part of um, it's very real at that moment, and even
Mm-hmm.
things that would be nonsensical make perfect sense in that moment because of the way it affects the memory. But even in the midst that, she just gracefully walks away from him and goes to what needs to be done. And I like this too. You get a glimpse. It's like it takes us back to a moment of Moraine's childhood or her raising,
Mm.
the way she was brought up. When she saw her father, it says her father walks out of the colonnade right in front of her in a long coat, at least a year out of fashion. And I had to stop right there and think, now she's been in the tower several years. What does she know about current Carhine fashion?
Mm.
But she knows that this is Moraine. That little touch is like, that, who else would have even thought of that except Moraine?
Yeah, that's an interesting touch. I didn't quite think about it. I took that as just a note that the just a reminder of how the ter'angreal messes with your memory. I didn't really think
Yeah,
of putting it at some sort of difficult to define point in your past. It makes sense that she would still know what's in fashion and what's not. I
yeah,
think noble women come to the tower, people can come and petition the tower for needs and
yes.
things like that. So she probably still gets to see that somewhat.
It's not like she's, you know, there, getting a subscription to Cosmopolitan, keeping up
Right.
with all this, but somehow she's managed to either that or in her mind, maybe, it kind of took her back to this certain time, and whatever he was wearing was a year out of date to that time. I don't know which, but either way,
Yeah,
it was
hard to say.
it was a year, yeah, it was a year out of date, which also now, and we discussed this a little bit last time. We know that the Aes Sedai that are around putting the weaves into the ter'angreal affect the test, and that's proven here when, you've already spoken of it. Elaida left very quickly. Someone very close to Moraine had to have added in some of these details
Mm.
about her father. You know, somebody was trying to make it difficult for her. Yet at the same time, it was someone who didn't keep up with fashion. So if they were throwing in these details, whether it's
Ooh.
Elida or someone else, they were putting in someone, you know, from her memory, yet they didn't get it
Mm-hmm.
perfectly.
Oh,
They
that's
they
a
got
good
it
point.
a
Oh,
year
these
out
are
of date.
Kyrian clothes. Here you go. Yeah.
Right.
Huh. I like that. There's a
But
lot of different ways you could read that detail.
yeah,
Another kind of cute touch was how embarrassed she was when she first came out, thinking that all the sisters saw some dude kiss her in one of the
yes,
tests.
yes,
um, she blushed thinking about that, and I think Anaya or someone says, "Girl, if blushing counted as not keeping your composure, nobody would pass."
right, right.
So apparently, they try to mess with everybody in ways that would make them blush like that.
Yes, yes. Well, because if they're trying to see if they can hold their composure under pressure, they're choosing tests to pressure them in every way.
Hmm.
Again, with her prudishness, you're constantly clothes are either not there or they're disappearing. Again, someone kissing her and evidently kissing her very passionately. Um, you know, this because that's part of who Moraine is. In my imagination, I believe it's part Terungriel pulling things from the mind, and then the sisters doing the weaves using those things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I like
and,
that.
and and we don't know that until we could get a chance to study the Terungrial itself. But that's in my mind how that the two would have to work in kind of a synergy.
Yeah, because I
But
don't think any person could know that many details about them, especially when you have people like the Sea Folk sisters who never really share anything about themselves.
yes,
You got to
yes,
have some magical means of pulling stuff out of their deep subconscious to make these scenarios out of.
yes, absolutely.
I think last time we compared Moiraine to Nynaeve because she's the other Shawl test that we see throughout the series, but we found some parallels in their characters. And there's one notable difference here in that. So there is a similarity. I think at the end of Nynaeve's test, people were also thinking that maybe they had done her dirty, that somebody had made part of the test too hard or too tricky. So Moiraine's situation was very similar, but the way that they reacted to that is different. So Moiraine sees it as, oh, Elida was trying to make me fail. This is terrible. Now with Nynaeve, kind of everybody is on her case because they're probably jealous of the fact that she skipped the novice period. They're also jealous of the fact that she's the most powerful channeler they've ever seen. So she's probably got a whole team of people making the tests especially difficult. But
Yes,
Nynaeve, instead of saying, oh, these women made this test hard on me this time, she says, this test is BS. Like, this should
yeah,
not be, you should not be expecting people to be emotionless robots while they channel. You should allow people to keep their personality and their passion and maintain the personal reasons that they want to use their power for good. And
right,
Moiraine does not question the whole structure of the tower in that way. She questions a few blips in it that don't seem to make sense,
right.
but she kind of accepts most of tower socialization a lot better. And part of that could just be that Moiraine is used to being a noble woman, used to following a lot of very strict rules about conduct, whereas Nynaeve has had a position of authority in a small village, and their backgrounds are just so different. So I think that leads to their composure being different. You know,
Right.
Moiraine has a temper too, but that not only was kind of calmed down in the tower. I think all throughout her noble upbringing, she was taught to rein her reactions in quite a bit, whereas Nynaeve was not in that way.
Yes, and well, since this is Wheel of the Mind, let's talk about the mind a little bit. To me, I always had the feeling that Nynaeve, once she got outside the two rivers, had a little bit of an inferiority complex.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she was found to be a wilder with such great power, with such unimaginable potential, even though she got to do some tremendous things along the journey, she always she had a chip on her shoulder. She felt like she had to prove something, that she was not just a backwoods healer or wise woman. She was a woman of power. She was someone to be reckoned with. That she felt like she had to prove that all the time. She felt like she had to prove it in the test, walking out of the test. Like you said, it's not just this one Aes Sedai has something against me. Well, everybody feels something against me. The whole test is wrong. The whole test, because of this somewhat inferiority complex.
Mm-hmm.
She never felt like in my mind that she measured up. So she was always having to prove that she measured up.
Mm.
So she really came to it with this, yeah, okay, I'm stepping in here. You've embarrassed me a little bit. Now I've got to prove something to you.
The only chip that Moiraine seems to keep on her shoulder for the most part is about her physical size.
Yes, her height.
She,
Yes,
yeah, she does not like being reminded how small she is. So she liked having, wasn't in a previous chapter, we read that her horse was really tall. So she isn't, or no, it was the other way around. She wanted a small horse so she didn't look like
right,
a tiny child on top of a big one.
right.
um,
So she got one small with great endurance, but it had to be, you had to match her stature in a way.
Right. And then in chapter 12, another Aes Sedai calls her a little porcelain doll, and she gets so offended by that.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
which I mean, I would too if someone spoke to me in a condescending way like that. It certainly did read as condescending.
Right.
Um,
Right. I
but
think it
yeah,
was
that's the
intended that
thing.
way.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, speaking of the test and how it goes, trying to decide whether it's kind of right or not, because we've seen, you know, Nynaeve's criticisms of it, or we've seen how Elaida might have pushed the limits of it a little bit. I think
Right.
your point in one of our previous episodes about Elaida's help was reiterated here. So Moiraine notes as soon as she came out of the ter'angreal that her injuries were far worse even than Elaida's beatings, which we saw were really bad.
Right. Right.
She also notes, quote, without Elaida, she would never have practiced trying to weave faster, and without that, she might well have failed. But she
Right.
suspected her father had not been Elaida's only special addition to her test. Too often, her weaknesses had been laid bare by someone who knew them particularly well. The woman had tried to make her fail. So she sort of acknowledges that. I think without Elaida's quote help, I might not have passed, but I still hate her. Basically,
Yes.
she still crossed a line there.
Yes. Yes. And she did. I think it's very clear that Elida does have a beef against uh, Siwan and Moraine, and
Mm-hmm.
she definitely wanted them to fail at this point, or at least wanted to make it more difficult on them, wanted to make it extremely difficult, because I think she's a woman that, as long as she feels like if she's your friend, she's a very close friend, but if she ever thinks you slighted her, even when you didn't, she was going to see payback. That
Yeah.
that just strikes me as her personality.
It's also kind of hard to tell where the line is as far as what's appropriate in the test, because they don't talk about the test at all to let you know what it's supposed to be like. Nobody can talk about their own test afterwards. So it's another one of these tower policies that leaves itself very open to the vulnerable initiates of the tower being abused.
Yes.
And so it really just depends on kind of how the accepted feels about it. There's no like policies that we know of that this crosses, which is concerning. I really think the tower needs to kind of shore up these sort of gaps in its policies and the way that it structures its training. So, you know, it seems like the test is supposed to do its best to tempt you from completing the weaves serenely as instructed. So it would be hard to say, was this person trying to make me fail, or is just this what the test is supposed to be?
Yes, I see what you mean.
But Moiraine does not take very long. She doesn't take a lot of convincing just to put the mice in Elida's bed. She talks
Right.
herself into it pretty quickly, along
Yeah.
with Siwan. And, you know, Siwan, we have already talked about, she views Elida's help very differently. I don't imagine that Siwan at any point during the test ever said, wow, without Elida's beatings, I don't think I would have passed.
Right.
Even though we didn't see her test and what was in her head, I would bet that she didn't view it that way, because last time she didn't think at all. She didn't even remember that Elida said she wanted them to pass.
Right.
And I took that as evidence that Elida actually said that, because we got Moiraine's perspective. But I have to remember, Moiraine may not be an objective narrator either. Like, he used this unreliable narrator with these points of view, and maybe
Yes.
Moiraine was trying to see why Elida would have done that. Siwan never once put herself in Elida's shoes in that way, it seemed.
No. No. Yeah. She does not have a lot of empathy for someone
No.
like that, especially someone
No.
who's slighted her, because she also has a temper, has a lot of pride. Felt like she's a woman that has something to prove. Although with Siwan, I don't see that as someone who becomes spiteful about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see her as someone who is constantly having a chip on her shoulder. I think she started out that way because she was a poor fisherman's daughter,
Hmm.
but I think she felt like she did prove herself, so she could treat people, graciously when she was able to. She didn't start out just treating people nicely and graciously, giving them the benefit of the doubt. They had to
Mm,
earn that with her
that's a
because
good point.
I noticed too when Moraine gets back to her room. Of course, like you said, the other accepted to treat her differently because even though technically she's not yet Aes Sedai, she's done everything except take the oaths and go through these steps and choose an Aja. So they're already deferring to her as if she's a sister, and she wants to kind of be there. I guess just that moral support of Siwan, just a hug. I did it. It's something that Siwan's already gone, and she says, well, even here, the shawl brought separations.
Mm,
So it's like, that's almost a foretelling, of course, of what's to come with their
hmm.
relationship. We're so close. We love each other like sisters. Yet already the shawl is bringing separations between us that cannot be avoided. Um, and I kind of saw that as in a way, kind of a sad foretelling of how their
Yeah.
relationship would change. That they would always love each other, but they would not be able to reconcile and have that kind of closeness and continue that friendship that I think both of them would love to do. Because again, the needs of the tower, and in fact, the needs of all the world in this case, come before their own desires, their own friendships, uh, their own sisterly love for one another.
Absolutely. I think we talked about this in a previous episode how in the Great Hunt, when we see them reunite,
Yes.
they they're having to hold things back from each other, and there's that distance of authority. There's also an interesting part of that chapter or that series of chapters that links up well with the current one we're discussing that brings a little more levity to this because we did get kind of sad there for a little bit. Moiraine was worried coming out of the test when Varen was holding her clothes. She was worried because the whole time before she went into the test, she thought somebody had read her book.
Yes.
Well, I am convinced that Varen did read the book during the test because in chapter 7 of The Great Hunt, Blood Calls Blood, Varen interprets the dark prophecy that was scrawled on the walls of the prison in Fal Dara for Siwan and Moraine and assures that nobody else knows about it. She said, and of course, Varen said calmly, the man who channels must be one of the 3 young men traveling with you, Moraine. Then some more time goes by, more discussion. I assume, Mother, that he is the dragon reborn. I cannot believe you would do this, leave walking free a man who can channel, unless he was the dragon. And then they're like, whoa, Varen, what? What are you talking about? Sit down.
Mhm.
Tell us everything you know. How do you know this? She goes, it was nearly 20 years ago with Tarvalin besieged that I had my first clue, and that was only, and then it trails off with an ellipsis. Varen
Right.
always knows. So I think her first clue was something about these girls probably sneaking around. They're kind of up to something. People knew that they were on duty when Guittara died, and then
Right.
she has a hold of the bundle of clothes that has the book in it
Yes.
during Moraine's whole test, which we can assume takes hours to do those 100 weaves.
Right. Right.
So Varen
And
always knows. Get a tattoo of it, wear a
yes.
t-shirt of it, whatever you have to do to remember. If you suspect
Varen
Varen knows
always knows.
something, she knows it.
Yes. And even if she didn't have a chance to read the entire book, if she just thumbed through it, she sees a list of names, and of course, it's said that Siwan kept hers with her as well. She
Oh,
mentioned
right.
that she had hers in her pocket. So very probably feels around. "Ooh, there's a lump in these clothes too." Because I'm assuming, and I don't know this, that she was not part of uh, the sisters who were conducting the weeds, so she wasn't busy
Right.
the entire time
Maybe just there for
of the
ceremony.
ceremony, right?
Yeah.
Um, which I noticed the ceremony, going into it, there's certain ritual things that were said. Coming out of it, it is done 3 times. So
Mm.
they stick to this ceremony, but in between, she probably had time to he flips through. Here's a list of names, and is able
Hmm.
to put 2 and 2 together because being a brown sister of such renowned intellect, yeah, she figured things out pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. So that was a
Yeah.
fun Easter egg to find in this chapter since I had only just pretty recently read that stuff in The Great Hunt in my reread.
Yes.
Um, Another meta point, just about stuff I like in this
Hmm.
chapter,
Yeah,
is
tell us.
I love these character growth moments. You know, we've said he's great at writing climaxes, but part of the reason for that is because of how good character development is in these books and how much we care about the characters. Otherwise, we wouldn't be as invested in the climaxes and all the suspense. And he also masterfully writes montages. This chapter opens with a montage after having gone into a detail of a few of these vignettes in the previous chapter. Then it speeds up and we see just kind of the narrative cycling through these. And you can just see that as this visual montage on film,
Yes,
I think.
yes,
And this is not the only place where he's done this. So that's kind of a pattern that he has with some of these types of scenes. The other notable one I'm thinking of is in The Great Hunt. So I just finished that book this weekend. That's why all my references are to The Great Hunt. When Rand causes one of the portal stones to glitch and he experiences those several lifetimes,
yes,
it goes through a few in detail, talking about his entire lifespan, and then it speeds up. He was a soldier,
right,
he was a shepherd, he was a beggar and a king, he was a farmer, gleeman, sailor, carpenter. He was born, lived, and died in Aiel. Sometimes Moraine came and took him away from the two rivers. Sometimes other Aes Sedai came for him. Sometimes the Red Ajah. It goes on more about how sometimes he married Egwene, sometimes she gentled him, and other times she mercy killed him and he thanked her for it. And in the midst of all these flashes, there's also a constant throughout it. And he does this in the test chapters as well. So in Rand's Portal Stone lifetimes, every time he dies, at the moment of his death, he hears a voice saying, "I have won again, Lews Therin."
yes,
So in the test, we don't always have verbal ones. In the accepted test, there's the way back will come but once. Be steadfast, and you have to go through that portal, or else you might get stuck, right? And then
right,
in the
right.
Shawl test, the constant is not so much verbal, but it's the six-pointed star,
Hmm.
and knowing that they have to go towards it. And that's pretty much all that they know.
Yes,
But that's the constant. It comes up every time. She saw the star, on a mountainside. She saw it in
yeah,
a place with towers where people were babbling incomprehensibly at her and all these different things. So it's
right.
just a beautiful, like ritual type of pattern. And the montages are just so gut wrenching because even though they flash so quickly, I feel like I experienced all of them with just a few
Yes,
words. He gives me
yes,
these vivid images, and I've kind of got so much rich detail.
yes. And I had not even tied that in with a constant with each of these, kaleidoscopic flashing montages of images and scenes and almost lifetimes, but there would always be a constant. But you're right, I had not caught that, but that's very good detail.
That is about all the detail I had on this chapter. Do you have anything else before you move on to your chapter 11 summary?
No, I think we've run that one out pretty well. All right, chapter 11, just before dawn. This chapter begins with Moraine being contemplative. She's contemplating the prank they just pulled, which he did not give any detail on, except when they were looking forward to it, they had six mice and they mentioned Elida's bed. But now she's contemplating on the events of the night's prank and the coming ritual in the morning. Uh, and so she waits patiently because they're supposed to remain awake during the night, contemplative. Uh, and so she waits until seven sisters, one of them who is Elida, comes to summon her. When they knock on the door, she takes her time, gets a brush, and kind of puts a few errant strands of hair back into place, which were not out of place. But again, to have that calm, when she goes to the door, they silently form a ring around her. They go to Siwan's door, who opens hers immediately. She's standing there ready. Silently, she comes out, and again, this ring of seven sisters around the two of them escort them down into the basement levels of the tower where they were the day before for their testing, into the same room. There's a ritual greeting there that they all go through. They see on the other side of the arch Tamra, who of course is the Amulet seat, Aeldra, and the sitters grouped together by Aja stood there by the ter'angreal, and they come to the arch, and of course they can't both go through, so they had agreed upon this. They were going to do everything in lockstep that they possibly could. Even the ritual greeting, they answered at the same time, almost with one voice. So even though it may have been bending tower protocol a little bit, no one had ever mentioned that something like this had been done before. They were in lockstep as they went through this together. but they couldn't both fit through the arch. So they had agreed ahead of time that Siwan would precede her through the arch. Now, in payment for that, when they get to the Amerlin, they kneel down side by side before her and they get ready to take the oath on the oath rod. The Amerlin lifts the oath rod off the cushion that it's on, extends it over, and Moiraine puts her hand on it first to take the oath first. Because when Moiraine had insisted that Siwan proceed her through the arch, evidently Siwan had said, "Yes, I'll do it if you'll do one thing for me. You know, you take the oath first." And Moraine says she would not have relented if she had known that was the price that Siwan would extract. But that's what they wound up working out between them. So even just by a few seconds, Moraine, in a sense, becomes an Aes Sedai, just like some moments or seconds before Siwan does. Although what the Amerlin does is she allows Moraine to take the oath, the three oaths rather, on the oath rod, and then instead of having her stand up and go and choose an Aja right then, she has her wait there, and then Siwan takes the oath on the oath rod. So she allows them to stay in lockstep as much as possible, as much as it's human for them to do. Once that's completed, they stand up there to choose their Aja. Of course, they had already discussed this. Even though in previous chapters, Moraine had kind of summarized in her mind that she thought Siwan may choose a different Aja. She knew she was going for the blue. It's sometime in between they had discussed this and worked it out between them, and found out they both had chosen the blue. They approach the blue sitter, so the other Ajas just kind of gracefully stand up. They make their courtesies. They leave. Even the Amerlin leaves, so because she is of all Ajas and none, so she can't stay for that, even though she was formerly a blue Aja herself. And so there's only Moraine, Siwan, and the Blue Sisters there. They put the shawls upon them. Leanne places the shawl on Moraine, and Raphella places the shawl on Siwan. I kind of pictured this in my mind, much like the hooding ceremony at someone receiving their doctorate. It's just a little bit of a ritualization, and they place the shawl over each of the sisters, and then each of the Blue Sisters who are there kiss the girls on the cheek and give them a saying, "Welcome home, sister. We've waited long for you." Again, a ritualized saying. Then Leanne and Raphella, the two who had shawled these two, or given the shawls to them, escort them up to their places in the tower. On their way, they, of course, make sure they can ask questions. And Siwan asks about blue customs. And so they begin telling them about the customs along the way while they walk. They get up to the blue quarters of the tower, and every blue sister in Tar Valon lined the main corridor there, formally wrapped in their shawls, and greeted them. It's kind of a beautiful picture of solidarity. And of course, they're along the way when they're learning many of the customs of the Blue Aja. They're almost overwhelmed with it, and they realize there is almost as much to learn after gaining the shawl as there was to gain it in the beginning. So a little bit of some overwhelmed feelings there, yet they do truly feel like they're finally home.
So I like the ceremony of this chapter. Robert Jordan does a great job writing any kind of ceremony. All his rituals feel so important and just kind of give me chills every time.
Yes, yes, yeah, I do too. The ritual greetings that they have just to enter into the chambers. Who comes here? Is Tamara's voice, and of course Moraine says Moraine Damodred, just to see one gets her name at the same time, and so you get the understanding the girls know a little about the ceremony, even though so many things are kept secret about becoming Aes Sedai.
Mm-hmm.
They had to have been given the ritual answers ahead of time. It has to be something that's taught to acceptance when it becomes obvious that they will probably one day make the shawl. They may not be walked through every step of the ceremony, and they're given nothing about of course, the testing that happened in previous chapters,
Right.
except the fact that there was would be a ritual response when they ask you how do you come. There's some ritual responses they give, but that's all they know of the testing. But at this point, when it comes to coming into the chambers to receive the shawl, to take the oaths, they know the ritual responses that's been gone through with them. They knew they would go through the arch and and kneel there before the Amerlin and kiss her. Well, after they bow formally, they kiss her ring and kneel down on their knees in front of her, ready to take the oaths. And of course, they know the oaths. They give those
Hmm.
word for word. The wording of the oaths, you could tell, was very careful. And having read the other books prior to coming back reading New Spring, we knew part of what this was,
Mm.
but you know, to have the wording of it, you under the light and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I vow that I'll speak no word that is not true. And then, of course, the feeling they said almost like this bubble or this garment that covers you from head to toe, every inch of your skin, you know, comes over you. They give the second one, you know, by the light and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I vow that I will make no weapon for one man to kill another. And then the pressure grows and it tightens a little more. Then they get that third one, under the light and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I vow that I will never use the one power as a weapon, with the caveats, of course, except against shadow spine or in the last extreme of defending my life or that of any warder or another sister. And then, of course, that feeling tightens down on them more. And it kind of makes me wonder, something that's not given here, the original design of that ter'angreal, the oath rod, because the Forsaken, they I don't recall it ever mentioning that they knew what it was,
Oh, I
but
think
they
we
knew what it
do.
wasn't. Okay,
Yeah. Okay. I
go
think
ahead.
this one is a type of, uh, or it may just be similar to, but I think that we learned that it's one that's used to bind criminals. They can make the oaths that they won't do the same behaviors again, and
Oh,
it's used like a
okay.
punishment. It actually cuts lifespan in half as well, which is part of the punishment, something that the Aes Sedai don't know about because they're forbidden from talking about age, and also because they don't have the examples of the kin, those women who were put out of the tower to see just
Right.
that they can live to be like 600, whereas most Aes Sedai cut off at around 300 is about
Right.
as long as
Okay.
they live.
I had forgotten that detail. Thank you for bringing that up. I remember the Forsaken, either kind of thinking about, conjecturing, or talking about the Oath Rod, but I knew it was not being used for what it was designed for. I had forgotten the original intent of it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, just the fact that they, someone plays around with this, they figure out what it does, they make it a part of becoming Aes Sedai, which was probably thousands of years before the events we read about here, because it's been part of the tower for so long. No one knows anything about it. No one knows why it originated, or how it originated, and it may have been in the beginning just a way to to bind the Aes Sedai to the tower. We don't want anyone running loose doing their own thing here. If we did, the nations would rise up against us. We wouldn't exist anymore. So we've got to find some way to curtail power, to curtail people's natural ambition. The wording of the three oaths, are very constricting, yet it leaves the proper amount of leeway for someone to be able to do what needs to be done. But yeah, I find that very intriguing how it's all tied in together, and reading this, it gives you the feeling of something very ancient. That
Mm.
maybe the origins of it have been forgotten, but never the intent of it, and,
Yeah.
and never the use of it. So you were right earlier in the use of all the rituals here. They're not too lengthy. They're not
Mm.
too shortened. They give you the weight of tradition, yet you get straight to the point of what they're there for. It's nothing is added and nothing is left out. It's exactly what it needs to be.
Yes. I think the oath rod and it being used for a different purpose than what the ter'angreal used to be used for, at least in the Age of Legends, is a good example of many of the strange customs we hear about in this chapter from the
Yes.
blues. So there's a lot of blue Aja specific customs we hear about that seem completely ludicrous. Nobody knows what they started from.
Yeah.
I actually even thought some of them were a joke, so I had misremembered some of it from reading the first time. I thought when the sixth blue sister, to greet her as a new sister, or to greet both of them as a new
Hmm.
sister, said that they owed her pies. I
Yeah.
I thought that was just a joke, and that's how I falsely remembered it that way from the last time I read the book.
Right. Right.
Um,
But but obviously that was one of the traditions they kept, because when they got to
yeah.
the up to the corridor, and we see in the next chapter, one of the sisters there greets them and says, "I see that Eldra has stolen my right of the pie." Well, and it comes out, of course, Eldra is one that has really began studying a lot of the old traditions of the Blue,
Mhm.
and she's the one that's filling them in on this as they're walking to the blue quarters,
Mm.
which of course, again, by tradition, the towers are those corridors of the towers have been cleared. So all you have is Aeldra, you have
Ru-
Rafaela,
Yeah.
who's walking along with Moraine and Siouan, and you're escorting through just empty hallways. Which, and I thought it was kind of intriguing too. Moraine just kind of pulls this thought out of the air. Imagining the tower completely empty became all too easy. It would be
Mm.
one day if matters continued as they were. So again, this just one sentence, and it's all, nothing preceding it or following it, of the eventual decline of the tower that they've seen, that they've thought about, or I guess the continued decline of the tower would be a more proper way to put it, because they know it's not what it used to be, both in numbers and in the powers of the individual sisters. But during that walk, Elder is just filling him in with all kinds of different things. They can only wear blue socks and leave Tarvalon, and a lot of these are traditions that no one knows anymore and no one follows. Yet some of them are extremely important to the Blue Sisters. Almost, I get in my mind, it's almost like code. You could see a Blue Sister anywhere and you would know she was a Blue, even
Mm.
if you'd never met her, just by
Yeah.
some of the things they do. And I'm sure each of the Ajas would have these secrets. And no, I'm not asking you to reveal the secrets of the White Aja, but just acknowledge that they're there.
Of
Uh,
course.
yes. Anyway, I thought this so rich. I can just throw a sentence in there, and you kind of get this shuddering sense of foreboding.
Yeah, I definitely got a little chill from that. I was interested in picking at some of their customs. So some of them made sense, like Moraine said, seemed very sensible. Others, one of the Aes Sedai says, remember the apple blossoms? Even the Greens don't remember what battle that was supposed to commemorate.
Right, right.
My headcanon about what this means, and I wondered if you had any ideas. I haven't heard of any
None.
beyond this. The only association I have with apple blossoms in this series is the death of Perrin's family, which has not, because he buries them under apple trees. And so
Oh,
um, that's what I just always remember. Anytime people talk about apples, apple blossoms anywhere, I always think of
yeah,
Perrin's family. Obviously, this is way, way before that event. But
yes.
I'm thinking Perrin is one of those mythical figures who gets reborn. There's
Hmm.
these stories where myths become legends and fade, or
Right,
legends become myth and they fade from memory until the wheel turns again and people don't remember any of the stuff that has happened before. So I'm
right.
thinking, what if this is commemorating the Two Rivers or Manetheren independence movement in some other previous turning of the wheel, because it
Yeah,
happened in a previous turning, and now nobody remembers what the apple blossoms mean. I don't know. There's no evidence one way or the other, but I just kind of
right.
like thinking about the characters being
Yeah,
reborn and how these things have happened before and will happen again.
right. Because we know, of course, Rand, of course, being the Dragon Reborn, we know that Matt, has all the strategies and memories of all these long dead generals, especially the Manetheren. But we don't see a lot from Perrin of that uh, former lives, those memories and things brought up. So you're right. Maybe it's something just kind of in the subconscious, and that's why he gravitated toward that place to bury his family.
Yeah.
I would like to think that anyway. We have, like you said, no hard evidence of it, but I would like to think it.
Mm-hmm. And another one of the customs that Moraine noted was that you're not allowed to marry in the Blue Aja. And she said this is sensible, and we have talked about this, how you wouldn't want to outlive a family. But
Right.
it's interesting to me that they don't apply that same logic to taking warders, because we see how that grief drives them mad, at least for a
Hmm.
pretty short period of time, or well, pretty long period of time, at least a good
Right.
year, that they're just kind of useless sometimes.
Yes.
But we know that grief is possible for people to bear. We know that we're going to all have to lose some family members at some point, but that doesn't make us say it's not worth getting close to people. And it's interesting that they have this warder bond that makes you feel viscerally, physically, the moment of somebody else's death, but
Yes.
they won't take husbands or have children, which would result in probably a less supernatural form of grief that would also be bearable, especially with a long lifespan, to be able to move on.
Right. And it does kind of mention that some of the other sisters, the other Ajas, might marry occasionally. It's still, I don't think, very common, but and in my mind, I instantly thought of the Green. I don't remember if it
Yeah.
mentioned them specifically or not, but that's just naturally where your mind goes with that. But yeah, it does seem kind of strange in a sense. Um, but with a spouse, you would be more likely to protect them than you would someone who's viewed as just a warder. Even though the warder, you're so close, you not only feel very intensely the moment of their death, but from the moment they're bonded as a warder until that death, they're in your head literally. I mean, you have the sense of connection with
Yeah.
them that you cannot have any other way outside the warder bond.
Hmm.
So in a sense, they're kind of closer than a husband.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine a sister taking a husband who was not a warder, although I don't know why it couldn't happen so much as you couldn't imagine having a warder over here and a husband over here because the warder is going to know what you're feeling. It'd just be extremely awkward, I would
Right.
believe. Um, but yeah, a warder kind of knows that to be a warder is to face death constantly, which is one reason
Mm.
they're restrained violence all the time. But their entire function in life is to serve and protect the Aes Sedai and to give their life when necessary. Since she cannot forge a weapon from one man to hurt another, if she chooses a warder, she has a weapon with her, and he
Yeah.
has to fill that role that the oaths constrain her from doing. So he is the weapon she cannot forge, but that she can choose. So that would be very different from a husband, where you would want to shield him because he can be used against you very easily. A warder might be used against an Aes Sedai
Yeah.
in the sense he could be captured, ransomed, whatever,
We actually
be
see
used to
it.
blackmail her. Yes,
We see
but
Cimarog torture someone's warder to torture the Aes Sedai as well.
right, exactly, and you can see that, but in one sense, the warder has signed up for that. A husband
Mm.
would not have. So I can see the sense in it, even though one part of me says, "What's the difference?"
Mm.
The other part says, a husband would not have signed up for that. He would have signed up to be a mate, to know you're going to outlive me and whatnot. But to have, husband wife relationships should be more. I want to say 50-50, although it's 100%, 100%. But it's
Mm.
giving and loving and investing yourself in the life of another person. And as a warder, it's one way. I'm going to give and sacrifice my life for you if necessary.
Oh, that's a good
Um,
point.
so anyway, just my thoughts on it. I could be
Yeah.
wrong. It's happened once before.
I think that probably is the difference that the tower, maybe the Greys could argue to you about why this policy is in place. That the Aes Sedai would be sacrificing more for a spouse or for children than she would for a warder, whereas the ward, it goes pretty much one way, but the warders, like you said, I didn't view it that way. I thought, well, it's such a liability that you're gonna kind of lose your mind for a while when he dies, and he's not gonna live
Yes.
as long as you, but I think that's still an important distinction the tower's probably respecting there.
Yes. Yes.
Do you
Uh,
have any other thoughts on this chapter, or are we ready for chapter 12?
no, I'm good. Let's roll on.
Okay. So in chapter 12, called Entering Home, our newly raised Aes Sedai are being welcomed into the Blue Aja quarters and shown to their rooms. Moiraine, of course, is thinking about decor, as she always does.
Hmm.
So they get shown to their rooms. They ask them, "Oh, are these okay?" Moiraine has to kind of sidestep the lie and not say that she's
Yes.
disgusted by all the frilly lace and stuff. So she says they're more than adequate. Immediately thinking about how she's gonna have to switch out all the decor. Siwan seems to not mind. So they have rooms and they're right next to each other. That's the good news about them.
Yes.
Edith, they find, is the first selector of the Blue Aja, which is their leader of the Aja, and they're not supposed to reveal who the leader is to anyone, which is interesting. Yeah, I think we're not supposed to know the heads of any of the Ajas.
Correct.
And Edith and Anaya and some of these other Aes Sedai are making all these cryptic statements about something dangerous they're about to have to learn about. They're saying things about how their capabilities are going to go far. The Blue Aja doesn't waste people's capabilities.
Yes.
Moiraine has no idea what they're talking about, and she's really nervous. And, she says this is a scary enough time. What else am I going to learn about that's dangerous, that's going on? Moiraine likens all this confusion and subtlety to the Sun Palace intrigues, and she thinks this is a time to listen and observe and say little. She also notices weird kind of power structure. She doesn't know why, but she notices some people deferring to others, and even deferring to her and Siwan as being in some kind of authority over them, even though they've been Aes Sedai for just a few minutes.
Right.
They get a little bit of time for breakfast, but they use some of that time instead to try to figure out what the heck is going on with Edith and these other Aes Sedai that they're meeting. They're trying to puzzle out what all these relationships are, what the danger's going to be, and all of that. They also have some time to get ready before going to Edith's apartments, and we see Moiraine taking time to get cute. She's really excited that she has something to wear besides accepted dresses. After
Yes.
6 years, 3 years of wearing just white, and then 3 of wearing white with the bands of colors at the bottom. And, in typical Robert Jordan fashion, we get rich descriptions of her clothing and hair and accessories. Then they head to Edith's apartments. Everybody looks so upset and just kind of like disgusted and reluctant to talk about what they're going to talk about. Edith just comes right out and says it. She says, you've been taught this whole time not to think about strength and the power, whether it's your own or anybody else's, but actually now you're going to think about it constantly. It's a matter of hierarchy. Unless someone is specifically ordained into a specific title or position over you, you need to defer to the sisters who are stronger than you in the power. And the greater the disparity in power, the greater the deference that must be shown, which also means obedience, but they don't come right out and say it in that way. Siwan does not seem super bothered by this. She's like, we're pretty powerful, and in 5 years, we're going to reach our peak, and we'll be more powerful than most people here. Moiraine, however, is really worried that the fact that they have to defer to other sisters is going to hamper their mission to find the Dragon Reborn. She's not going to be free today like she thought she was, because there's all these orientation activities lined up and all of this deference she's going to have to show to these other sisters. And this is illustrated specifically right away when they get kind of snatched away by other sisters to work on specific jobs that look like they're going to keep them occupied for a long time. Satalia Delarme snags Siwan to get her to solve puzzles, because the Blues like to use espionage and cryptography, and they think that Siwan's puzzle solving ability would be great for that. And around the same time, Tamara the Elmerlin summons Moiraine, and then the point of view switches briefly to Siwan. In the rest of Siwan's POV, basically Siwan and Moiraine meet back up, both find out they have these jobs that are going to occupy their time constantly, because Moiraine got assigned to distribute the bounty to the mothers that we have been learning about this whole time. Moiraine confesses about the plot to put her on the throne that she previously hadn't told Siwan about, and they kind of comfort each other. They actually kiss, and the scene kind of fades to black. The chapter then switches POV again, and so I'm rushing through these because this is the Moiraine POV reread, so I'll just briefly talk about what happened in the chapter, but not really get into the other points of view. Switches to Lan, which is not surprising that a man of such few words would have a very small point of view in the chapter as well. So the Aiel are retreating. Lan feels his pull to fight his one-man war with the Blight again, and he hopes that he doesn't run into any Aes Sedai. Dramatic irony there.
Right.
Thus ends chapter 12, Entering Home.
Mm-hmm. Another chapter with very little action, but great subtext.
Mm-hmm.
But we start to learn so much about the inner workings of the Aja, which, of course, from the point of view, has been completely hidden from us. And in fact, I guess not just from the point of view, but just entirely in this entire series, we know a lot about the Aes Sedai. We don't know a lot about the inner workings of the Ajas and all the secretness of it. Things have been hinted at, but here it's finally explained out for us, at least from the perspective of the Blue Aja. Yeah, I thought it was neat how they found it so distasteful to talk about the subject of deference, based on a sister's power, that even once she told him, she said she felt like she needed to go brush her teeth, basically. So she actually walks out of the room like she's going to get soda and clean her teeth. Because the tower, as Moiraine has noted before, if it sees something bad in you, it roots that out completely. They're very, very good at that. And then she said, and to quote, lights, the tower rooted something out of you, and then made you use that very thing to determine precedence. And I can kind of, this is my perspective, I may be wrong, but I can kind of see a need for that among the accepted. Because if you have an accepted who is very strong in the power, as Moraine and Siouan are and have been, then if they know that things are kind of judged on the order of power, strength, and precedence, they're going to get above themselves. They're going to start acting
Mm,
toward weaker sisters in ways they shouldn't, ways that could really uh, uh, bring them to harm and could earn them a lot of penance. So I could see that up until this point, they do everything they can to root that out among the accepted. Even the accepted among themselves are kind of learning not to measure themselves against other accepted.
mm-hmm.
It's kind of one of those things that not that the tower thinks it's wrong, but the tower thinks it's inappropriate at that time.
Yeah.
And okay, so we've spent years getting this out of you. Now you're going to have years and years and years and decades and possibly centuries to have a completely different point of view because now you're a completely different person. You're no longer an accepted. You're an Aes Sedai. You have been you've gone through the ritual. You've been baptized through the test, if you would. By the oath rod, you are a different person than the woman who walked in here. So
Mm,
now it's okay for you to do those things that it was forbidden for you to do before. But it does kind of show the effectiveness of the tower's training.
mm-hmm.
That they got this out to the point that it was hard for a sister to talk about it out loud, and it was hard for Siouan and Moiraine to start adjusting their thinking. And they kind of walk into this apprehensive. Well, okay, this is going to take some getting used to. This is going to be a struggle. This I can see me getting myself in trouble. And it was pointed out to him that if you fail at this, if you mess up, the sister whom you slighted chooses the penance. You know,
Ooh,
and it can be mortification of flesh and spirit. It can be any number of things here. It can be a month on a labor farm or whatever,
yeah.
according to what you did and how you broke protocol here. So it's taken very seriously, and of course they're going to have some trepidation about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange system because it doesn't allow for people to change their roles beyond their natural talents. And Moraine, even once she realized it, felt sorry for the sister who was always having to kind of practically bow and scrape to all of the others that they had recently met, thinking, wow, and I didn't even notice that she was so low in the power because the tower
Right.
really brainwashed that out of me for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
now I see it. And we see that not all channeling societies think this way. I mean, the Aiel wise ones certainly don't. They have people who
No.
can barely channel a trickle or can't even channel at all that can be considered wise ones
Right.
and hold just as much authority.
Right. But because they've earned that spot. It's
Yeah.
based upon basically what you've achieved rather than that natural innate talent.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So the and the Blues are very concerned with that innate talent and wanting to put people in specific jobs because of it. You know, they talked about a little disparagingly of the other Ajahs, how they let people just wander off even if they're very talented.
yes.
Which kind of I could just feel, Siwana Moraine's disappointment at how restrictive their Ajah is.
Yes.
And I'm really feeling a lot more confident in my Ajah choice now. I really value the independence that I'm allowed. And it's really just unfair that the Ajahs are so secretive to the accepted because I feel like the girls didn't really get a chance to make an informed choice about which Ajah would let them complete this dragon mission the easiest.
Right. But then again, to kind of play forsaken advocate with you here, if they were allowed to teach the accepted about this, they would be allowed to kind of groom them. They would be allowed to
Mm,
kind of woo them, and you would have some Ajahs that might grow more prominent, and might snatch up all the more, shall we say, strong or those strengthened in the one source more than others, and more or less just kind of take over if they desire to do that, simply by recruiting the best and brightest and the strongest among them. So I can kind of see where there needs to be some naivete when they approach choosing their Aja, and
hmm.
it needs to be based, in my opinion, as an outsider, it needs to be based upon a person's natural inclination. Some people are just more studious and more uh, adept at being a Brown. That's the thing they would enjoy doing.
Mhm.
And of course, we don't know the ins and outs of the Brown Aja. We're not given that point of view. You know, they from what they do know, from the limited exposure to the secrets of it, that's the kind of thing they would love to do. So they have that predisposition of personality. And then there are those who want to take up a just cause, and they are more drawn to the blue. There are those with logic to the white, and um, a little more hot-blooded to the green and red. So I can see the reasons for it to be based more upon a personality, so a person feels more at home when they're there. And do you not, along with Moraine and Siouan, feel at home when they walk in there? Before they learn of the precedents and these things, they feel like they're at home. They finally
Yeah,
belong someplace.
it does
And
feel
I
very
think
welcoming. That's a good point.
yes, I think that sense of belonging is more important than just strength and the power. But if they don't feel at home, they're never going to be effective in that aja.
Mm, that's fair. I think you're right that our protagonists do feel very at home in nostalgia. Moraine already is all in with the blue dresses and wanting to go buy more.
Yes,
And
yes,
I think I love getting to see her visually transform into the Moiraine we first see in Emond's Field in book one. So we've been talking about how her character is getting there. We see the seeds of this growing. We see her developing into the woman we meet later. But here we get the visual transformation of her
yes,
wearing blue silk and the Kisera on her forehead. And I just love that because I think it signals that there's going to be some big changes coming up soon
right,
in the
right,
story.
right. And so we see them reaching for the future, and we also have these glimpses back to the past. One last note I have on this chapter is um, she's basically being shown, not told, but being shown she's not going anywhere for a while. They're giving her a job to do. She said she let nothing of anger touch her face, a lesson learned long before Tarvalon. So again, a glimpse back to the childhood,
Mm-hmm.
her temper that she was well known for, yet
Mm-hmm.
she learned to kind of hide that and shield that long before she became a novice at Tarvalon. So again, we see all this reaching forward to the future and this one little glimpse back to the past that helps me know Moraine a little more and like her a little better.
I agree. Okay. Did you have anything else on this chapter?
No, that was my closing remarks
Okay.
on it. Thank you. All right, well, that's all I've got. So join us next time, everyone, for chapters 13 and 14, when Moraine goes to the bank and she and Siouan get fitted for some new dresses.
Great. And of course, we know there's definitely going to be more going on under the surface. Thank you, dear listeners. If you want to get in touch with us, follow me on Twitter at Lajara Sadai. Email me at lajaradane, that's DAYNE, at gmail.com, or check out our Wix website at lajaradane.wixsite.com/Wheel of Mind. Thank you. Tell them goodbye, Giskel.
Goodbye, Giskel. Is there any after show? I think we covered so much during the show. I started trying to limit my remarks on the author, the
Mm-hmm.
after show, so people can kind of get immersed in the story a little more.
Okay. Yeah, I
Um,
liked that approach, and I just remembered because I just finished editing episode 4 where you said that, but I didn't remember that when I was writing my notes before I
yeah,
finished editing today.
yeah. I appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this. You are so much more deeply versed in these stories than I am. Even though I began reading them when you were just a little girl, I still love the story. But the attention to detail in the coming books, I just it's not locked in memory anymore. Where you're in the
Hmm.
middle of a reread right now, so you have a lot
Well,
more of that. But I appreciate you inviting me to be part of it because you're asking me to read books, B, talk about things that are very nerdy, and I was born for this.
right?
In fact, I can sit down and I can talk about things I don't know very well and kind of work my way through it.
Uh,
But this is just so much fun for me, and I enjoy doing it. And I appreciate you letting me be a part of it because, yeah, reading books and talking about things that interest very few people, I am all in on that, sister.
oh, absolutely. And it doesn't, I don't think it incredibly shows through on like in the recordings as I've gone through and edited them that
Yeah,
you've forgotten a lot of it or anything. I think I'm upfront about, hey, this is where I am in my reread, so I remember
right.
this book, but not any
Yeah,
of the rest of them.
right, right.
And also that I hear I hear goofs in other podcasts all the time. And this is
Oh,
not
yeah.
to diss any of the others that I listen
Yeah.
to, but I hear people pronounce things very differently, and it's totally fine to me when the
Yes.
co-hosts
Oh,
do
yeah.
that. I
Hmm.
hear things like people saying the wrong name, people switch up Elaine and Egwene a lot.
Yes.
And people will accidentally say Matt instead of Perrin or Rand, and it's not a huge
Right.
deal, or people will
Right.
forget something entirely that, and I'm like, I'm screaming at them like, no, you dummy, it happens in so-and-so book.
Yeah.
But I'm sure people do that with us, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
That's just part
but
of it.
like today when you brought up the thing with Varen, all these years later, man, that was so awesome. And I know it's because you just read it and it kind of, caught your memory. You make me want to go back and reread these so I can do that too. And it's just not going
Yeah.
to happen, I'll tell you. But
Yeah.
not anytime very soon anyway. So,
Right. Well,
so I'll
I
have to rely
think,
on you for details of what's to come, and you rely on me of details to pull quotes and
yeah.
little details of within the story. Maybe the two of us can just keep working that angle. But
I think it
uh,
works. And I think
yeah,
I
it's
also
okay.
have sort of cheated by the fact that I'm listening to so many podcasts as I reread, because that
Ah,
gives me so much more chance that like I rehearse the information mentally.
yeah, yeah,
So a lot of it gets tucked away a little more because I've heard like 4 or 5 different people talk about their take on it already. So
yeah. Oh, that's
that
cool.
gives me a
Yeah,
little bit of a leg up. I think that's just, you're not engaged with fandom in the same way, and that's
yeah,
totally fine. Like, I like that we are coming to this as different generations of fans with different types of
yeah,
experience with it. And
yeah.
part of the reason I know about some of these things is just because I see people talking online about the stuff they like the most. And I'm always afraid
Right.
of being kind of a broken record of just repeating stuff that other people are saying in the fandom. And so
Yeah,
your perspective, I know, is not going to be like that. And it's refreshing.
yeah. Or to keep up the pretense of being Giskel and you being Lajara Sadai,
Oh, yeah.
that when you put it on the Wix site and in real life, father and daughter, and oh God, I sound like such an idiot to these people.
No, it's
Now they
fine.
know that, and they're
Whoops.
or when I first read these books, and my daughter was kind of asking me the names of the characters on the cover,
Yeah, I'm
and
sorry.
no,
I
and
didn't tell
and I
you
would
like how
mention,
much.
I know,
Yeah.
and I would mention things like that, but I would never mention that it was you. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, you only
and
did
I'm,
it like once. I mean, I've re-listened to these having to edit them, and
ah,
it's not super
yeah,
apparent. And
yeah,
when people go to listen to a new podcast, a lot of folks will say, don't listen to the first few episodes, wait until they've really hit their
yeah,
stride. So
yeah,
maybe in the future,
yeah.
nobody will catch that anyway.
I'm one of those people that used to horrify me to hear my own voice recorded. I've done it so many
Same.
times now. I'm cool with it.
Oh,
It's
I
just like
know.
one of those things you
Yeah.
get inured to it after a while. But
I know. I forget that
uh,
that's a thing where other people
yeah,
hate their own voices, because I'm so over it. I've had to do this so
yeah,
much for work, and you've done that in your professional
right,
life as well, that
right. It's just kind of funny. Now I still refuse to watch videos of me preaching and all. I need to. I probably need to cut out some annoying habits and things. But
that's
um,
tough too.
oh yeah,
Usually when
it
I
is.
do like video lectures, I have a
Hmm.
background of mostly the screen is mostly the slides, and then it's only a
Right.
tiny picture of me in the corner, so I don't have to focus on myself as much.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
that painful.
I understand. But there's things like that that is helpful to do if you can get through the agony of it.
Oh,
So,
I know.
uh, and learn little quirks you have that you didn't realize you did and things like that. Makes you a
Hmm.
little more effective. So, oh, but it's just so much fun. I walk away every week and I'm enjoying it. I'm into it. I can't wait for the next week.
Oh, I
But I
know.
am nerded out for a while. I'm just like.
Yeah.
I never thought I could reach that point when I'm like, okay, I don't want to talk about Star Trek or anything for at least a couple hours. So,
Yeah, it becomes, I guess when you set it to a regular schedule, it becomes a little more work-like. And
I mean, not to me. It's just, I guess, because we focus on it so intensely, we get down to
yeah.
such detail that normally I don't do in things like this. I'm just,
Mm,
digging the story. So,
yeah, you
all
get it
right.
out of your system, I guess.
Yeah. But like I say, by tomorrow, I'm ready to go again. I'm like, let's do it on
Same.
Tuesday this time.
Well, let's go ahead and pick our chapters in. 13
Okay.
13 is Moiraine goes to the bank. 14 is they go get dresses. Do you have a
Yeah.
preference?
No, I will try to do like I did previous weeks and
Hmm.
read them both, have notes on them both, and
Yeah.
then I give you a preference.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, if that's all right with you, I will try to do that this week. And I kept intending to do that for this current one, and I just didn't during the week. But
Yeah.
but on the plus side, I did make 2 pretty cool knives yesterday. I'm really proud of.
Ooh, cool.
Because the previous weeks I spent as much time cleaning and organizing the shop and getting things in place because things are getting all scattered out as I did working on knives. So
Yeah.
yesterday I just walked in and just got 2 knives, projects I started months and months ago, and got them done. So
Well, do you care if I
except for the final
include that?
polish.
Do you care if I include that in the
Oh,
after show? Because people like talk about their favorite beers and stuff in theirs. I'm
oh,
like, we can have a few
yeah,
personal touches.
yeah. Oh no, that'd be perfectly fine. Yeah.
Cool,
So
cool.
make me sound a little redneck.
There you go.